Okay. And the response to semasiologistics and his response to DeterministicOne on antinatalism. And first of all, you said you're going to wait for my concession and restating of premises, but I didn't concede anything. I said, while I think it can work, I've decided the word arbitrary has too broad a definition. I probably should have said it has too broad a definition for you. But anyhow. Okay, moving on.
Okay, DeterministicOne, I'm going to go ahead and try to give a quick rebuttal to your last video. Yeah, so I think you pretty much misunderstand most of what I'm saying.
I think you misunderstand what I'm saying.
The counterexamples that are provided, I'm going to let you respond to after defining. Well, rather, I'd just like for you to define arbitrarily.
Okay. Arbitrary. It's from dictionary.reference.com. I think their default is Random House Dictionary. It says subject to individual will or judgment without restriction. And I believe I said in my, I think whatever, another previous video, I said, yeah, just because you want to. All right, you don't need a reason, you don't need a justification, you just want to. It's up to you. Okay? Going on, contingent solely upon one's discretion. Basically the same thing. You're doing it, you don't need a reason, don't need justification, you're just doing it because you want to. And there's another, number 4, talks about, it has has 3 things: capricious, unreasonable, right? You don't need a reason, it's just unreasonable or unsupported. Unreasonable is the key one there. You don't need a reason, you're just going to do it because you want to.
You did define it once, but I want to make sure that you're not meaning to say that it simply means in a forced way. Because when I bring up the example that
well, I mean, you're going to do something just because you want to. You're forcing someone into harm's way just because you want to.
I can ask a parent to go and play, and the parent can say yes, no.
You know, it's strange you'd bring up a parent-child relationship in a discussion with an antinatalist. The only reason the child's in harm's way in the first place is because the parent brought them into the world. So any harm that comes to the child is the responsibility of the parent. I mean, maybe the child's adopted, but even in that case, if I was going to put that child in harm's way just because I wanted to, didn't need a reason, didn't need a justification, I just wanted to put them in harm's way, that wouldn't be ethical. I don't see how you can do anything just because you want to and call it ethical.
Knowing that there may be harm that could follow. The parent isn't, according to society, considered as unethical just for letting its kid play.
Well, yeah, once the kid's here, I mean, you can't lock him in his room forever. You got to let him play. You probably don't want to let him play on the freeway. Depending on their age and maturity, if they're just going to play in the front yard, that's probably safe enough. But just put them in harm's way just because you want to. I mean, the kid's got to play, so that's the reason. Right? You have a reason for letting them play in the front yard or whatever. You have a reason. You're not just doing it because you want to.
Knowing all the while that it could be harmed in some way. So yeah, I don't know why that would count as harm, or rather as an unethical choice on the parent's part.
Well, again, the unethical part was bringing the kid into this world, because it's going to be harmed. They can't prevent harm. It just doesn't happen. I mean, I've been harmed. My son's been harmed. My wife's been. Everybody gets harmed.
So yeah, that does satisfy parents arbitrarily choosing to let a child, arbitrarily putting a child in harm's way. When you let a child go out and play, you don't think that it will be harmed, but you know that it could be harmed, and so in a sense,
that's different, isn't it? Like I just said, you can't lock your kid in a room forever. What would be the point of even having a kid if you're going to lock him in his room forever? You have to let him play. So that's not just because you want to.
Putting it in the way of harm. There's always that possibility that it's going to be harmed. And
that's the argument antinatalists are making. When you're going to make a decision to bring a child into the world, you have to understand it will be harmed. You cannot keep a person, your child, out of harm completely, unless you lock them in their room, which in itself would be a harm. So yeah, just the whole idea of procreation there's no rational justification for it. I mean, I've said it before. I don't know if you heard it. The first job of a parent is to keep your child from harm to the best of your ability. But the best way to prevent harm is not to have the kid in the first place.
Or so in circumstances that you haven't first verified. If you don't even know what the child means when it says go and play. But
well, if you don't know,
object to the parents having said yes on moral grounds. They might just say, well, maybe you should check just to make sure, but that would be it. Nobody would say that he was an evil parent or that he did an evil thing.
Well, you're more like you're talking about being an irresponsible parent. I mean, yeah, if the kid says, I'm just going to go play and not, find out what they mean by what they're going to go play, that would be irresponsible.
So that example is meant to show you that the first premise is not necessarily true. Masochism is the same thing.
See, masochism, I mean, I can't believe you're bringing that up, but, I mean, still, even in the case of a masochist, is it okay for me to put that masochist in harm's way just because I want to? Would the masochist, I mean, are you a masochist? Unless you're a masochist, I don't think it's fair to speak for the masochist. Would they want me just because I wanted to put them in whatever harm's way I choose? Would they? Would they, if I wanted to throw them under a bus just to experience seeing someone run over by a bus, would they agree to that? Well, and also, if they agree to it, and I'm willing, it's not arbitrary anymore. If they want me to, it's not just because I want to. It's because they want me to.
Entities take two people obtain pleasure from inflicting pain on the other person. That satisfies that example is qualified by the premise. The premise says putting others in harm's way arbitrarily.
Right, and it wouldn't be arbitrary, would it? It would be consenting. There'd be a reason. One person wants to be harmed, and the other person wants to do the harming. So that's not arbitrary. One's not doing it just because they want to. It's consensual. There's a reason for it. Might not be a good reason to us, but to each his own, as they say, as long as you're not involving a third party that doesn't want to be harmed.
Is unethical. So it's definitely not against their patterns of behavior, against their conduct, against they approve of that behavior, the two people doing that. So, and that's the whole point of masochism, that it's not unethical, that it's just not something
I'm not saying masochism is not unethical. I'm saying to put someone in harm's way just because you want to. Arbitrary. Don't need a reason, don't need a justification, you're just going to do it because you want to. That's not ethical.
Those people do, that's all. So in general terms, to inflict pain on others in a sexual context, yeah, I mean, that's like the whole whip thing. Have you ever seen people?
Well, that's, again, there would be a reason. If a person wants to be whipped or whatever, there's your reason. It's not arbitrary. You're not doing it just because you want to.
people that wear leather and all that crap, like, that's, those people are deriving pleasure from the infliction of pain.
Well, see, it's like that's an oxymoron. Getting pleasure from pain. I mean, pleasure and pain are like different things, but so their psychology, I would have to say, is a little screwed up. But still, if one person were to just do it because they want to, they just decide, regardless of what the other person wants or doesn't want, they're just going to do it. That's not ethical.
But in those contexts, it's not unethical. That's what I'm saying. Your first premise is debunked by those examples.
No, it's not.
And so unless you can say somehow that it's not really pain, or it's not arbitrarily inflicted.
It's not arbitrarily inflicted.
Then you're not able to rebut the counterexamples.
Well, I am, and I just did.
And that means that I've debunked your argument.
No, it doesn't.
So if you just want to ignore that and assert that, oh, well, I'm just going to go ahead and repeat
I was going to ignore it, but since you said I conceded, no, I'm going to keep going.
First premise, as though the examples just didn't happen, then that means you don't have anything to say, and I win by default.
Yeah, keep saying it like you...
The point about falsifiability, though, and I'm going to let you just be clear on the definition of arbitrarily, because first you came up with this definition, and then you abutted a fourth sense that you found on probably was dictionary.com. But arbitrarily can also...
What's wrong with dictionary.com?
mean in a forced way, like you're a tyrant.
It can be. Well, yeah, matter of fact, tyrannical, that's one of the definitions. Tyrannical. Number 3. This is dictionary.reference.com. I think their default is Random House Dictionary. And then World English Dictionary. Founded on or subject to personal whims, prejudices, etc. Capricious. Despotic, dictatorial. Yeah, I mean, it's doing it because you want to.
Right, that you're forcing someone to do something, and that's really where I think you want to be in using.
Put someone in harm's way. Putting someone in harm's way. That's an action. You're doing something. You're forcing. You're putting somebody in harm's way. Arbitrarily, just because you want to. Don't need reason, don't need justification.
The word arbitrarily, like you're forcing people to come into existence, you're not giving them the choice.
Well, yeah. They don't have a choice. We're forced into this world.
Right, so if you're saying that about harm in that way, then don't...
We are put into this world. Arbitrarily.
Arbitrarily.
I mean, like I said before, my mother put out 400, 500 eggs. I was the lucky egg, arbitrarily. It could have been the next egg. If it was the next egg, I wouldn't be here.
It's forced. That way there's no confusion. And if you're not, then my examples stand to dismantle the first premise. And so, but we're going to leave those aside for now and let you define arbitrarily and what you really mean by it.
Okay.
And talk about falsifiability. No, you don't understand falsifiability.
No, you don't.
Using that in the wrong way. Falsifiability is definitely a fallacy.
You got to give me a source for that. I cannot find it. I found falsifiability, Wikipedia. Falsifiability. Within the philosophy of science, falsifiability or refutability is a quality or characteristic of a scientific hypothesis or theory. Okay? It's not a fallacy. Fallacies are illogical reasoning. So, I mean, it's just, I can't find anywhere where it says falsifiability is a fallacy, although it does have see also in the falsifiability page. It says see also fallacy, but I go to fallacy and list of fallacies, and I can't find falsifiability as a fallacy. So anyhow.
And I use it to attack your proposition that we humans are, through our own conscious minds and through our own volition, able to right now, all 7 billion people, that we're able, in human terms and through our own volition and conscious minds, that we're able to stop procreating definitively. No, that is humanly impossible.
Well, you see, that's the only reason that I think, I think all procreation should stop. But that's based upon my conclusion that procreation is not ethical. If I thought procreation was ethical, I wouldn't care. But I think procreation is not ethical. Therefore, I don't think anybody should procreate. Just because possibly we can't get everybody to stop procreating doesn't falsify the conclusion that procreation is not ethical.
Why is that humanly impossible? There are numbers of conditions that would first have to be satisfied for that to be possible in human terms and by way of our own conscious minds and volition. We would have to all be able to verify that we're all equally dedicated to...
See, I just want to stop procreation wherever I can, wherever possible. That's better than nothing, okay? Ideally, stopping all procreation would be nice, but it doesn't change the fact that I am trying to convince people not to procreate. If I can convince one person not to procreate, that's going to stop a whole bunch of procreation. Because, well, I mean, I have a relative that has 6 children. One of her children has 4 children. Another one has 2 children. Another has 1. So she's got 7 grandchildren. If someone could have convinced her not to procreate, that would have stopped 13 lives. And that would be a plus.
The movement, to the argument, to the doctrine. And we can't do that. Obviously, people are...
Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that procreation is not ethical, and I will try to stop it wherever I can.
Excellent at strategizing. Obviously, people are excellent at deceiving other people.
Well, yeah, I mean, most of the population believe in some sort of God or some other happy horse shit. Most people have delusions. Most people that are procreating are deluded. Most people are not procreating at sufficient levels to keep the species alive. So there.
Since we can't always know whether we're being deceived, whether we're the victim of some scheme, we can't always know for certain that every person who apparently agrees with us really does agree with us, right?
Why does that matter? I don't see how that... I mean, my conclusion, my argument is that procreation is not ethical because it puts another in harm's way for no good reason. They're doing it. As a matter of fact, I found a site that lists reasons for procreating, and one of them is I just want to, and then they give the real reason, which in that case would be, yeah, they just want to, and then they have another column, suggested alternatives to procreation. Choosing to breed precludes most other things you'll just want to do. So, I mean, yeah, there's no reason to procreate, except for we live in a society that biases natalism. Everywhere you look, the freaking commercials, governments, the religions, they want you to breed. Maybe let's give some a few more examples from this page. I'll put the link in the description. I can't help it. It's a biological urge. Real reason. Unexamined motivations. Suggested alternatives. Institutions await those who can't control their biological urges. Okay, battery died, so just going to read one more from there. Reasons given. Want to give our parents grandchildren. Real reason. Still seeking parental approval. Suggested alternatives. Live your own life and encourage your parents to do the same. So anyhow, I think I'm about where I was.
Dying at the same time. Why is that a condition? Why is that a necessary condition? Why do we have to satisfy that condition if to know that birth would stop definitively? Because that's what you're proposing. You're saying, with this argument, we should all stop procreating. Not one per...
Yeah, well, yeah. Because procreation is not ethical. That's the basis for that desire. To stop all procreation is that procreation is not ethical. So to say that, you know, we can't do that now, you can't say that sometime in the future it might not be possible. I was using the example of slavery. One can make the same argument you're making about procreation. You're denying it, but it is true. Slavery is not ethical. There are people that could have said, well, there's no way we can get all the slave owners to get rid of their slaves. I'm sure there was a time when that was, well, we went to war over it, right? Slave owners didn't want to give up their slaves. They're still slaves now. So there may always be slaves. It doesn't change the fact that slavery is not ethical.
So not to people, all people. That means the 7 billion or more persons who exist now today need to stop procreating.
Well, they should stop procreating, but just because, yeah, right now, it probably is undoubtedly not going to happen right now, but that should that stop me from trying to convince people not to procreate? No. I think procreation is not ethical for all the reasons I've given. Therefore, I'm going to argue the case. If I can just stop one in my lifetime. I think I've already convinced one not on YouTube, but in real life. I think she was already kind of leaning that way. That's pretty much, I think, someone else, I think Piro said that, yeah, you can't really convince the unconvincible, but those that are kind of leaning in that direction, which I was. I mean, I had my vasectomy within a year after my first wife's miscarriage. I just realized how dangerous it is. In that case, it was I guess you could say, fortunately, a miscarriage. Any number of things could have gone wrong, and that would have been on me. Okay? I can argue against procreation, even if it's not possible right now to convince the whole world that procreation is not ethical.
If you're 1 year old, if you're 100 years old, no more procreating. So to be able to do that, the only way that we could make sure that every person, the youngest person, all the way, so if you're 100 years old, then obviously there are a lot of younger people when you compare to you, right? If you're 100 years old and you see a person who's only 1 year old, well, obviously you're not going to watch that person grow up to make sure if it procreates or not. So the only way that we could all make sure that no one procreated is if we all died at the same time. That's the only way we could be sure that no one procreated. But we can't do that. We can't all terminate ourselves simultaneously, not only for psychological reasons, but simply because of the logistics involved in something so radical as that. I mean, how do you propose that we do that in a practical, humanly possible way? I don't agree at all that these are things that we can do. We can't stop procreation definitively, and we can't be sure that it actually is stopped.
But we can do it on a case-by-case basis, I guess you could say. What you're telling me is not a reason to stop arguing against procreation. That's the conclusion. And that's the whole basis for wanting everybody to stop procreating, is that procreation is not ethical. Okay, you haven't said anything that makes procreation ethical. You just said we can't stop everybody, therefore we shouldn't even try to stop anybody.
We not only have to, also another condition, that two conditions that we would have to satisfy is omnipotence and omnipresence. We're not, all the people, because there are always divisions. There are always disagreements, whether it's religious, whether it's political.
Well, yeah, no kidding, there's disagreements. That's why I'm making the argument. I'm trying to convince people that it's wrong to procreate. You're putting someone in harm's way without good reason. Like I say, I'm going to put this link. It's got reasons people give for procreating, and they're all lame.
Whether it's philosophical, whether it's historical, whether it's futuristic, whatever you're talking about, in whatever domain of knowledge, there will always be fringe groups and central groups. There will always be opposing, right and left. There's never going to be just one universal consensus.
Well, going back to the slavery thing, not everybody, there's still people today that think slavery is okay. But they're now in the minority. I mean, if we can get half the population to agree that procreation is not ethical, maybe we can go to war over it. Who knows? This is a serious issue. People are bringing people into the world for no good reason, and they're being harmed for no good reason, and then they die. And in most cases, not in most cases, but in many cases, they leave behind someone else that's going to struggle to survive, be harmed, and die, and so on. If I can just stop one, that's going to stop a whole bunch of harm. I don't need to convince the whole world. If we can get just sufficient numbers, we might be able to do something about it. Just like slavery.
About which every singular, every mind in existence agrees. I don't know any topic that is like that. There's always.
So what? So I shouldn't make an argument? Nobody should make an argument? Nobody should complain? Nothing would change if you don't complain. It's right there in the U.S. Constitution. If you got a complaint, Congress can't tell you you can't complain.
Always some form of disagreement, right? So that would, in and of that one condition, we wouldn't be able to make sure that that people didn't procreate somewhere and then lie about it, and go and hide their kids in some forest and only attend to them by way of some hidden underground community that raises kids in the forest.
So I shouldn't make the argument. I just don't understand. You're stating these hypotheticals and then saying that, I guess you're saying I shouldn't make the argument because I can't convince the whole world. Well, fuck that.
And that way, when the whole generation dies out that's aware of this doctrine and trying to put it into action, doesn't know that they're still there and that life is going to continue on, right? So when you say,
well, I mean, I think I've already said it, but you do know that this planet will be lifeless one day. I mean, if we can never get a winnable scenario, nature's going to take care of it for us. But the whole idea is to convince people not to make that mountain of skulls as big as possible. Want that mountain of skulls as small as possible. And those that are going to be here, if they're going to be here, when the planet starts going lifeless, they're going to have it really bad. So the antinatalist would like to prevent that as well.
Things like, we can do that. Well, it's possible in the universe, in universal terms it's possible, but not in human terms. And that's what you're responsible for if you're proposing an argument that you think we should enact. No more would you propose this argument, since now you see that it's humanly impossible to actually realize, then you would propose the argument.
See, you're saying you can see into the future and that this will never happen, and that there'll always be these enclaves of procreators, but that doesn't change the fact that I am compelled to make the argument that procreation is not ethical. Stop procreation wherever I can. If I can convince somebody not to procreate, that's a win.
That we should fly away with our hands from the Tyrannosaurus Rex that's trying to attack us.
You see, this fly away with our, we know we can't fly away with our hands. That is a fact. We cannot fly away with our hands. We, each individual, can choose not to procreate. Just because I can't convince the whole world right now doesn't mean we can't convince half the world in the next century or so. I don't know. It may be possible to do this. You're saying it's totally impossible. But that's not falsifiable.
It's a valid argument. You should do that. But if it's impossible, then that's not really advice that you're going to give to anybody. What, is it? So, unless that really is humanly possible for us to do, the argument doesn't go anywhere.
Wrong. I'm going to keep saying it. If I can convince one person, which I think I already have, which, like I said, she was probably already leaning in that direction anyhow, not to procreate, that prevents a whole bunch of harm.
It leaves the discourse of rationality.
No, you're leaving the discourse of rationality. You're saying I shouldn't make the argument because I can't convince everybody.
So it means no more rational for you to make the argument that a person should fly away from a Tyrannosaurus Rex by flapping his arms.
Why do you keep bringing that up?
Say that we should all stop procreating. It's not a rational.
It is possible. I had a vasectomy. I cannot procreate. So my dad had a vasectomy after I was born, so he couldn't make any more children after I was born. It is possible for individuals not to procreate. Just because right now, very likely, the whole world will not be convinced doesn't mean I shouldn't make the argument. Doesn't mean the argument's not rational.
Statement. So I don't know how to be any more clear about that.
Well, you're not being clear. So I mean, you're not making a case. You're not telling me why it's ethical to procreate. You're saying it's not possible to convince the whole world, therefore my argument's irrational. Well, you're saying it's unfalsifiable, but again, you need to give me a source where unfalsifiability is a fallacy. It's just unfalsifiable. It's not a fallacy. Like I said, saying God exists, that is not falsifiable. Because I can't go everywhere. It goes to your omnipresent argument. I can't go everywhere in the world, and maybe there's a God somewhere in the universe, but it's not here, so it's not falsifiable. The moon is made of to say the moon is made of cheese is falsifiable, and it has been falsified. Saying the moon is made of cheese is just wrong. I don't think that's a fallacy. It's just not a factual statement.
Reductio ad absurdum. If you want to argue with that, you're going to have to explain how each of those points can be satisfied in human terms. Because that's the proposition that you make.
No, it's not the proposition I make. It's the proposition you say I'm making. I am saying it's not ethical to procreate. And just because I can't convince the whole freaking world doesn't make that statement irrational. Now you're saying it's not falsifiable, but it is. Just give me a rational reason to procreate, and you have falsified that statement.
One of hundreds of propositions that the argument makes, okay? So if you're not sure
No,
about
it's the ones you make. I'm not making them.
about what I'm saying, you'd be better just to ask instead of simply denying and then repeating the premises.
I am acting. I'm making the argument that it's not ethical to procreate. That's all I can do right now. We don't have sufficient numbers to pick up arms and destroy the imposers.
Or denying and then just repeating the argument, or denying and then attacking me.
Well, back at you, I
The
guess.
ad absurdum problem is definitely an absurdity. I talk about that fallacy because life in and of itself is a value to life. Okay,
That's a circular argument. Now, you can say that we humans value life. You can't say life is inherently a value in and of itself. I don't even know what that means. I mean, the sentient beings have value because they can be harmed. Okay? And the antinatalists want to prevent harm to sentient beings by not bringing them into the world. You bring them into the world, they get harmed, they gotta work. Well, most people have to work, and they got, mediocre lives. They got these jobs they probably don't like. I had a job I didn't like, and then I got laid off, and here I am still. I can't find a freaking job. I got a degree in engineering, but nobody wants to hire me. I don't know why. Maybe my attitude comes through somehow, and they don't like it. I mean, I try to be pleasant on the phone and at interviews, but nobody wants to hire me. All because somebody brought me into this stupid-ass game.
That's not an argument. That's an assertion. And I back that up by appealing to our legal system and asking you what the worst punishment a person can receive in society is, generally speaking. And when you say, well, the worst crime is murder, so generally the worst punishment would be death itself.
Actually, I don't think death is a punishment. Punishment would be life in prison. That would be a punishment. See, that's why I'm actually against the death penalty, because it's not a punishment. I mean, I don't like having to... See, I'm a determinist too. So, and the criminal is a criminal because of circumstances he was put into. This brain in our heads is doing all the heavy lifting. That criminal can no more help himself be a criminal than the Pope could be the Pope. I mean, everything we do is dependent on the circumstances we've been put in. There's no reason to brag, and there's no reason really ultimately to point a finger at the criminal and say, oh, he's a bad man. His brain just didn't work right, okay? So the death penalty, it's not a punishment. It's an act of mercy, really. I have no problem with if they want it. If they say, yeah, just kill me, then fine. Put them out of their misery. But anyhow.
Torture, but that's not. We don't condone that in the West generally. At least not in the public eye.
Yeah.
The reason you have to agree that, or at least appealing to the justice system is indicative of the value of human life. That's why I appeal to it.
Well, yeah, the human life. See, not just life. You're saying life. I mean, life is the stupid game we're in. That's life. Sentient beings have value. Life, the stupid game of life, is absurd. That's where we disagree. I say what we have now is absurd. Yes, we have sentient beings that are being harmed, and we value those sentient beings. I don't know if I told you, my mom died when I was 19. Absurd. Absurd, absurd, absurd. Getting rid of sentient beings gets rid of the absurdity. But you're saying getting rid of sentient beings is absurd. Don't know why.
I'm trying to indicate to you that human life is is valuable to us.
Yeah, human,
it takes precedence
sentient
over
beings.
almost anything in most circumstances. Okay, there are always going to be circumstances when, of course, nothing is ultimately supreme so far that we know. We don't know. I mean, maybe like physical laws could be ultimately supreme, right? And like Spinoza's philosophy.
What do you mean ultimately supreme? I mean, existence is futile. I mean, crude forces created the first DNA-based organism. We all have that first organism in common. First organism DNA-based. And the DNA molecules been replicating for over 3 billion years. That's what keeps coming into the future, the DNA molecule. That's what's replicating. We die. We suffer, we die. DNA molecule keeps coming back.
Universe. But other than that, so far that we know, there's nothing that just stands above everything else. There's always something, there's always a circumstance where the thing has to give way. So when we talk about human life, of course, that's the same thing. There are some moments in life when we no longer value life. We might value our integrity over life. We might value our religious convictions over life. We might value the lives of others over our own. There are many instances where I would agree that human life isn't the highest value.
Well, no. Sentient beings is the only thing of value. Because they can be harmed. A rock can't be harmed. The moon can't be harmed. There's no sentient beings on Mars, and there's no problems on Mars. Only time there's a problem, it involves a sentient being. Sentient being equals problem. And we're just bringing more of them into the world, creating more problems, fixing half of the problems, and calling ourselves virtuous, patting ourselves on the back. Look at the good thing we did.
In the case of it's being compared to the presence of suffering, I would just use the simple reality in which we live today. If suffering were so great a wrong, a hardship, a horrible moral crime, then why do people procreate?
Look at the link I'm going to give you. Why do people procreate? Bunch of lame reasons. Bunch of crap. You can't look at the procreators and say, ask them, they won't give you a rational reason why they procreate.
Why do we all live and continue existing? Why aren't suicide rates out the door?
Well, because we live in delusional times. Most people believe in a God, an intelligent creator that loves them. Okay? And many people do commit suicide. Last time I looked, just this year, it was over 200,000 people who have killed themselves. Some of them maybe did like life at one time, but life got so freaking unbearable, they had to check out.
The window, out of the roof. I mean, why isn't depression as commonplace as happiness?
Because the unconscious mind tends to be optimistic. It's the conscious mind that tends to be pessimistic. So, yeah, most people are deluded.
Why is, those would be examples that would attest to life's being generally horrible and unpleasurable, etc. So
even if it was true, you're saying it's okay as long as only a minority of people think life sucks. Okay, we'll 1 out of 10, that's okay. If 1 out of 10 thinks life sucks, we'll just keep on procreating and they can go pound sand.
It's not enough if you appeal, for example, to our ancestors. You can't just appeal to their suffering. You also have to appeal to their state of mind and the appreciation of which they were capable. Appreciation of the universe. And
well, again, like I just said, we're hardwired to want to live. So Sure, I can look at it.
In terms of the domains of knowledge that we take for granted today, the ones that we didn't work for, but that we get for free by just reading. Those our ancestors that we, in our argument now, would subject to this horrible existence and these impoverished states of emotion.
Again, it's imposed. It's a stupid game being imposed on people. You don't know if they're going to appreciate it or not. You know there's a percentage of people who aren't going to be appreciative. That's a fact. And you're going to procreate anyhow.
Emotion and sadness and so forth, weren't actually aware of them in the same way that we are aware of them. It's in the same way that a dog can be happy just because it gets food. If we look back a million years to the hunter-gatherer humanoids that came out of Africa or whatever part of the continent that you think it best fits the origin of our ancestors, and look at the way they lived and ask whether they were happy. Well, in our terms, no, they were miserable. They had to live in caves. They didn't have any shelter. They had to run from predators, and I agree with you. Yeah, that's a horrible existence. But according to their intelligence, it was worth living. It was worth...
So what? We're hardwired to want to live. And in the future, they're going to look back at us, if there is a future, far enough in the future, they're going to look back at us and say, oh my God, how did they live? So yeah, right now, life is it's miserable. We're not accomplishing a damn thing. We're forced into this situation. We're going to suffer and we're going to die. And it's just repeating over and over and over and over and over. And you think we should just keep doing it because what? You want the mountain of skulls bigger. That's the only thing I can conclude, is that you like people suffering.
Trying to live. It's better to live than to die. I mean, that's the whole point of that question.
But to live means you're going to die. You bring another person into the world, there's just another death. You're imposing another death. To say it's better to live than to die. Well, the only way to die is if you live. Is if you're brought into the living. That's the only way death can happen.
The question is to be or not to be. To be or not to be. That is the question.
Now the question is to impose or not to impose. That's the question. Should you impose this existence on somebody else or shouldn't you? I say you shouldn't. There's no rational reason to impose this existence on another human being. Bringing a new human being into this existence is wrong. There's no justification for it. There's no rational reason to do it.
So, life is the value. That's the whole point.
No, sentient beings have value. The harm that is imposed has value. And the internet crashed, so I'll have to reload. So 1635.
Okay, DeterministicOne, I'm going to go ahead and try to give a quick rebuttal to your last. Justified why that is a value. So you're going to have to justify why it's not. All right, justified why that is. Then I guess you understand what an intrinsic value to be or not to be. That is the question. So life is the value. That's the whole point of that statement. Our obligation to ourselves is to exist.
Well, there's no obligation to ourselves. The only reason I'm obliging myself to keep going is because now, I had a family because I was basically delusional. I didn't I didn't think about the risks. I just procreated because I wanted to show off my genes. I don't know. I wanted to have a kid. Everybody else is having kids. I'm going to have a kid too. I'll show them what a real parent can do, right?
So if you want to say that no value, there's no value in human life, that's just a circular.
I never said there's no value in human life. I said life is meaningless. There's no point to it. Sentient beings are the value. That's the only thing worthy of value. Life itself, the game, is stupid. Shouldn't bring a sentient being into this stupid game.
Your statement. Then I guess you understand what an intrinsic value is versus an instrumental value. So.
Well, yeah. Intrinsic value is what sentient beings have because they can be harmed. I forget what the other value is, but whatever. Yeah, sentient beings have value because they can be harmed. And the only way they can be harmed is if you bring them into the world.
That's your issue, that's not mine. So reductio ad absurdum fallacy reduces the consequent world to absurdity because you're getting rid of the thing that we most value.
No, we're stopping the thing I value from being harmed anymore. Okay? I don't want other people brought into the world who don't want to be here. Okay? You see the difference. It's not absurd to want to prevent sentient beings from being harmed. If that means stop procreating, then so be it. It's not absurd. Again, this game is absurd. Stopping the game is not absurd. That's your problem. If you think this game is not absurd, you need to explain that one to me, because I think this game's absurd.
And I justified why that is a value. So you're going to have to justify why it's not. All right, thanks for listening.
Well, so you're confusing the terms. Life is a stupid game. Sentient beings have value because they can't. I'm repeating myself, that sentient beings have value because they can be harmed. The way to stop sentient beings from being harmed is to stop making them. The non-existent cannot be harmed. Until next time.